Tesla already sustained, continued that same price war here in the United States with the objective of putting maximum pressure on other EV startups as well as on the legacy automakers. And guess what? It's working. Tesla proactively and deliberately, intentionally is driving this price war to drive its competitors out of the business.
Some of the most important questions for Tesla investors these days are which electric vehicle companies will still be around in 5 years and why? Tesla has proven how electric vehicles are better in many ways, but will legacy automakers heavily promoting hybrids instead succeed? Who better to ask these questions than Michael Dunne, an expert in the auto industry who's lived and worked in both the East and the West for decades. Michael will share two very important points you've not heard yet. First, his prediction that Tesla will be launching a price war in the US. And second, there's an electric vehicle company, an underdog, who might end up winning it all. Michael Dunne is the CEO of Dunne Insights, an advisory firm with expertise in global electric vehicle markets and battery supply chains. Dunne is also an LP at Assembly Ventures, a Michigan-based venture capital company. Dunne was previously the president of GM Indonesia, and before that, the managing director of JD Power Operations in China. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for many weeks.
Thank you very much. And Mia also, I've heard about you. You've come with a great reputation. You're very cool, man, because you you worked in Asia for 25 years. You're both an entrepreneur and executive, and you speak many languages. You're the author of a book called American Wheels, right? In sort of how China, or is it GM, entering into Chinese roads?
That's right. American Wheels, Chinese Roads, the stories, the triumphs, and the setbacks of General Motors in China over a period of like 15 years when they really had it going on and then they didn't have it going on anymore.
Fantastic story. So first question, I want to understand better because this is pretty provocative. You have a prediction that Tesla is going to have a price war in the US. Why are you saying this?
You know what, Herbert? If a lot of people these days ask me, are we already in World War III, but we don't know it yet? And they're, of course, talking about places like Ukraine and the Middle East. But the same applies to global markets when it comes to electric vehicles. What we saw is about 18 months ago, Tesla launched a very aggressive price war in China. And because it was market leader, it forced all other players eventually to follow suit. And ever since then, prices have been dropping. They haven't stopped dropping in China. Then last year, we saw the war expand to Europe, where Tesla, again, in addition to many Chinese automakers, went in and scared the daylights out of European automakers with their very aggressive pricing. So much so that the EU Commission launched last fall a major anti-subsidy probe looking at products coming out of China. So we're here in our comfortable bubble called the United States, the exceptional market, and we think we're impervious to what's happening around the world until it lands on our shores. Well, guess what? Tesla, in my mind, has already sustained, continued that same price war here in the United States with the objective of putting maximum pressure on other EV startups as well as on the legacy automakers. And guess what? It's working. One only has to look at what's happened recently with Rivian shares, with Fisker on edge. No one's safe. And we see the global legacy automakers saying, there's no way we can compete on EVs right now. We're too expensive. We're losing a lot of money. Let's pivot back to something else, the good old days of maybe hybrids or plug-in hybrids. So Tesla proactively and deliberately, intentionally is driving this price war to drive its competitors out of the business.
So do you actually think that there's going to be additional price cuts by Tesla in the US? Is that what you're expecting?
We have not hit bottom yet. That's exactly what I'm expecting. And Elon seems comfortable with it. He understands exactly what he's doing. Just the other day, he posted a chart of Rivian cash flows and said, give it another 6 to 9 months and who knows? Never mind Lucid. So every time someone leaves the market, it's good news for Tesla. Apple this week announced electrics are too hard. Also good news for Tesla. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, Herbert. On the one hand, traditionally in the auto business, you say you never want to cut prices because you can never move them back up. But what if you cut prices so aggressively that you push the competition out, and then you've got a quasi-monopoly allowing you to creep your prices back up to better margins? And that's exactly what I see playing out with Tesla here in the United States.
Okay, well, I do have to ask you this question because this announcement came this morning. Stella Lee, president of BYD in America, was interviewed, and she said BYD has no intention of going into America this year, probably because of the political election that's happening. But they have set up shop. They've got a factory in Mexico. They have a factory in Brazil that they've announced. They just launched a supercar, or announced it yesterday. They've announced a $11,000 car that's going to be sold in China. What's your expertise? Are we going to see BYD coming into the US, and is it going to be head to head with BYD and Tesla in the US?
There's no doubt in my mind that it's a question of when, not if. I mean, for a couple of reasons. One, the United States remains the most lucrative market in the world. So if you're an automaker like BYD and you're looking around for growth and profits, the US has got to be on your list. Now, having said that, the Chinese will be very patient. They're doing exceptionally well in other markets around the world. BYD, as you said, is building plants today in Brazil, an old Ford plant that they're reconverting for BYD production. They're building a brand new plant in Hungary to serve the European market. They have a plant in Thailand where they're market leader, accounting for almost half of EV sales there. And there's a lot of talk about a plant coming in Mexico as well as in Indonesia. So in a sense, in Chinese history, Mao Zedong, when he fought the civil war with Chiang Kai-shek, he said, hey, our strategy is to take the countryside and surround the cities. Well, as that applies to us here in the United States, BYD and other Chinese automakers are attacking and doing very well in the countryside, and eventually will come back to the city, that being the North American market. But I would say we're at least 2-3 years away from that.
Okay, but we have to prepare for that. So there's a lot of conversation here. I want to ask you questions about like you were telling me, teaching me about the drivetrains. There's hybrids. There is this thing called extended range. We'll teach folks. But I want to get to this topic that you shared with me, that there is an electric vehicle company that you believe is an underdog and has potentially something that we need to be aware of, and that many of us Tesla investors are probably not paying attention to. Tell me who that is and more about it.
This company would be very, very easy to overlook. No one would blame you for overlooking them, but I call them the greatest underdog story in the history of the automobile, and that is VinFast, the Vietnamese EV startup that was founded by Vietnam's richest man, a billionaire named Vietnam's richest man, a billionaire, Chairman Vuong. His story is a fascinating one, but what we need to know about the company is that they're hell-bent on being a global player. They have a beautiful billion-dollar manufacturing facility that they built 4 years ago in Hai Phong, just east of Hanoi. I've been to Vietnam several times in the last couple of years, most recently at the end of last year, and I've driven their cars. Each time I visit, their cars get better and better. Now, why do I say underdog? One, Vietnam, Mr. Vuong and his team had zero automotive experience prior to launching this company 6 years ago. Zero. Second, Vietnam's domestic market is not that big. It's quite small. So unlike China or Korea or Japan, Vietnam cannot rely on its home market sort of as a safe base from which to, take market share at home and then export. So really what their big bet is that they'll be globally competitive in several markets at the same time. That's a huge wager, and that's why I call them an underdog. But the Vietnamese are tenacious. They never give up. They're always sort of adjusting, improving, finding a way to win. So on paper, they look like a small player that we can ignore, but I wouldn't underestimate their tenacity and their commitment, their determination to find a way to win.
And then I heard about VinFast last year because they were like the stock skyrocketed. I just look $60, $70, but then it fell all the way down to $6. And so what happened there? And should we still be concerned about them when the stock got excited and then then there's less interest at this point?
Right. So that's a classic case, I think, of a Wall Street play where the stock is listed as a SPAC and then the valuation goes through the roof. It's thinly traded. Stay away from that because you don't know exactly what's going on, and wait till it's more widely traded. Then we find our balance. Now, when I say the greatest underdog story in the history of the automobile, there's a lot for VinFast to overcome, and I think today it's probably fairly valued. It was way too highly valued before. Now it's come back to earth. What we are seeing, though, is some new developments from VinFast. As we speak, VinFast is appointing new dealers here in the United States. The plan is to appoint more than 100 this year, 2024. Now, that's a step change. Up until now, VinFast has tried to duplicate the Tesla model by selling through their own stores here in California. Beginning in 2024, they're going wide. They're saying we need to be national and we need to have franchise partners. So that's a huge strategic shift, and we'll see, will they begin to get traction? One of the things they've done since the beginning of the year is start to offer their cars with a $249 per month lease. I mean, that's an extremely attractive offer, and VinFast reports that its sales are jumping right now in places like California in particular. So don't count them out. I think the thing is, oh, are they the Tesla? No. Will they be a Tesla? It took Tesla 15 years. They're on year
Mhm.
5. So it's early days, but it's an exciting company to watch because they're so competitive and they never give up. I'm reminded, Herbert, of visits to Vietnam in the early 90s when I went there. And I got down into have you heard of the Cu Chi tunnels before?
No. What's
Okay,
that?
so the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War
Oh, I
would
see.
dig cities, basically cities underground, and they
Yes.
live down there, cook food, sleep. And today,
Yes.
as a tourist, you can go down into the tunnels and make your way around these cities. Well, I went down one time, and that was enough. You make your
Yeah.
way through this tunnel. It's so tight that there's no turning around. It's so tight, it gets very hot and humid, and then you can't see the exit. So if
Mhm.
you have any paranoia about tight spaces, don't go down there. But my takeaway was this people, the Vietnamese,
Mhm. Yep.
don't mess with them. The Chinese
Yep.
got their butts kicked by them. The French did. The Americans had our hands full with them. The Vietnamese are
Right.
tough, tenacious people. So that's why I feel like it's an invisible metric. You look at the sales, you look at the profit, no, they're not going to, hang on. They might just surprise all of us.
It's very interesting. I just took a look at VinFast. So I wanted to ask you, like, what's going to make a successful car company today, right? So you have to be in electric vehicles. VinFast is certainly in electric vehicles, but they started this thing also with some combustion engine vehicles. So they're not a pure play EV. I thought they were. How's this? How did they transition? Are they transitioning, or what's their plan?
They pivoted very abruptly. So they
I
did
see.
start. How do you start a car company when you don't know anything about it? Well, the chairman went out and he hired
Hmm.
several veteran executives from the auto industry, many from General Motors, and said, first of all, I need a car, I need a factory, I need a supply chain. And in quick
Hmm.
order, 2016, 2017, 18, they did that. And the initial play was to borrow on some platforms from BMW and Opel. And just as you say, they built those cars in Vietnam powered by conventional gasoline engines. And then there was a moment where the chairman woke up one day and said,
Hmm.
what am I doing? The future is
Hmm.
electric. We have to go all electric. That's it. And his lieutenants and his board members said, really? Because our gasoline is selling quite well and the customers like us, and electric's a whole different technology and we need batteries and supply chains and all the rest. And he said, yes, I understand exactly where we're going. So beginning in 2021, as recently as 2021, they said,
Wow.
stop all gasoline production. That's over, and
Okay.
we're moving exclusively to battery electric vehicles. So another super bold move. I know that the chairman has put a lot of his own wealth into this company. The estimates are something like $10 billion that's been invested so far. Of
Yeah.
course, the company also enjoys the backing of the national government in Hanoi. They want to see a Vietnamese champion go global and be a winner. So you can imagine he does secure loans and land and other, you know, help from the government to make this a winner. But the point, to your point, they start out
Yeah.
gasoline and quickly, oh no, gasoline's the past. We're going all electric. Today they
Yeah.
have model lineup that includes all of their cars start with a VF. So it's a VF3, VF5, 6, 7, 8, and 9,
Mhm.
plus a prototype pickup truck. So there's no shortage of ambition. I mean, think about it, a startup planning to produce 6
Oh my
different
gosh.
vehicles at the same time, export them to Europe, the United States. They just announced a new factory in India, uh, possible new plant in Indonesia. They're going for it. They're all in. If we're in Vegas, they're not going in halves. They're going all the chips in the center of the table.
Nice. I love it. I mean, obviously, just that decision alone, just I'm gonna drop ice cars. I'm gonna go right. That shows you I can make a quick decision. I can make the change, and we did it. That is what's lacking. Okay, so that's a company we need to keep our eye on. Like you said, they're small, but they're exciting, and they'll be. I didn't even follow them. I'll keep following them now. So let's talk about drivetrains, right? So this we talked about, people, companies who are smart enough to switch and go all electric. BMW is one company that I really think is going to succeed. As I follow it, be curious what you think, because they're also just really now making decisions. But what we're seeing with the other legacy automakers, some of the European, but primarily the US, they've backed off their EVs. You got Toyota, right, who's fully committing that we are hybrids. We're going to double down on hybrids for longer. It's going to take the consumer a little bit longer to switch to EVs. Now you know that the legacy auto, are going to stick with the ICE for as long as they can. They're likely going to promote hybrids. They're going to say EVs are the range is not there, the supercharger's not there. And then you've got this new thing called extended range. I bet you very few people here in the US even know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell us about these different approaches and what you think might happen?
Great. So let's start with extended range because I had the opportunity to drive one just this week for the first time. And I was impressed. You're basically an extended range vehicle is you have your battery electric powertrain, and then you have a small generator on the side. And as I was driving and the battery came down to a certain level, say 30%, the generator kicks in and as I'm driving, recharges the battery. So you can see the charge level moving back up. So what does it do? It says if the battery range to begin with is 300 miles and you have this generator that can top up, you end up with having 450 or 500 miles of range. Wow, what a nice solution. Now, it's not the most elegant. It does have two things going on under the hood. You don't have a frunk, but you have the all important range and the elimination of range anxiety and the worries about where's the charging station and is it working and how fast is it charging. It sort of does away with those. So there's a company out of China called Li Auto that has had
Yeah.
phenomenal success with extended range.
Yeah. Auto.
And I
Yeah.
fully expect the automakers here, I think Stellantis is going to put it into its RAM. Others will follow suit because it's a practical solution for so many consumers here in the United States. We like our long distance travel in big, heavy vehicles, going at high speeds, up and down hills, cold weather, hot weather. Extended range solves a lot of those problems.
Yeah, but now that I think about it, though, it still is a battery electric vehicle at heart.
Yes,
So
it is.
would Ford and GM move to that, or they're not going to do that? They're going to stick with a hybrid. They're going to promote the hybrid to pretend that they're electric, but
Mhm.
really it's a nice vehicle, through and through. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, do you think that Ford and GM would get into extended range is that a stepping stone to EVs, or it doesn't sound like it would be?
Here's my concern, and I say this as a Detroiter, native of Detroit. up around cars. My dad was the automotive journalist, automotive editor at Popular Mechanics, and also a
Wow.
legendary car spy. So I know cars, and I know car culture, and I know Detroit. My concern is what I've seen in the last 15 years is that Detroit has pulled inward. It used to be global, now it's North American. So to be blunt about it, Ford and GM have become large truck makers for the North American market, full stop. And the good news about that is they're really, really good at it and they have great loyal customers. The bad news is that they've painted themselves into a corner. We make big vehicles at fat margins, and that's our business, and we're not going to leave it. So, electrics or anything else that will diminish our margins is an inconvenience. We don't like to consider that if we don't have to. So, I see them staying, just as you say, with gas and hybrid as long as they can run that. In the meantime, yes, there's efforts to, Ford recently said $25,000 EV, but if the culture says our core business is large trucks for North America powered by ICE, how do you get out from underneath that culture and really sort of encourage and be a catalyst for innovation, imagination, and risk taking? I don't see it happening. That's a problem. That's a problem for Detroit.
Okay. I'm just realizing that your background is so unique. East, West, Europe, all the different drivetrains, all the different cars. Can you just give me a 101 then on what's happening just let's start high level, then we're going to
Yeah.
drill in into China and we'll drill into electric vehicles. But what's going on in this world right now with automotive industry?
I think big picture, I called China today, and I'd say this respectfully. It's an automotive Godzilla, the
Mm.
likes of which the world has never seen before. What competition came out of Japan or Korea years ago will pale in comparison to what we're seeing coming out of China. Let me just share a couple of numbers, and they may be familiar to you guys already, but it's worth repeating. One, last year China built 30 million vehicles, more than one third of total global production of all vehicles. They built 9 million EVs, more than everyone else combined.
Mm.
Now, on top of that, 30 million in production, they have another 10 to 12 million of excess capacity. What does that mean? That means domestic economy is slowing, demand at home is slowing, profits have gone to nothing. My Chinese friends in China tell me no one wants to stay in China. There's no money here. We have to
Mm.
push out. And pushing out is exactly what they've been doing. Last year, China raced past Japan to become the number one exporter of vehicles globally. And they're just pouring into new markets and overwhelming the competition with their low cost and very impressive quality. So while we're, keeping ourselves up at night worried about software defined vehicles or charging stations or the next battery, I predict the next 5 years, the single greatest disruption to this industry globally will be this overwhelming tsunami of Chinese cars flooding into our markets. That's big picture, and we've already seen Europe feel the brunt of that. The United States, of course, has a tariff, 27.5% tariff on Chinese vehicles. That's kept them at bay for the time being. But how many people know, for example, that Chinese China now is the number one supplier of vehicles to Mexico, right south of the United States? You say, how can that be
Mm.
possible? I don't see any Chinese cars on American roads. How can it be possible they're so popular south of the border? Take a visit, go to Mexico City, you'll see for yourself. The Chinese are changing the dynamics of the global game now and for the next 20 years. Mark my words. So the issue for us here in America is that we don't see Chinese cars here. And as a result, we tend to heavily discount their competitiveness. We shouldn't make that mistake. We need to wake up right now. That competition is real, it's coming, and we are not prepared for it.
Wow. Okay. Because I've been interviewing a number of other auto experts, and a few of them take the position that China will not be able to go global. And in order to be player in the auto industry, you have to go global. They're big in China. They're trying to go into Europe, but there's going to be tariffs. They're not going to be, the reason why they're successful is because they have low cost labor. But when you try to create a car in the US or Europe, you're not going to have the low cost labor. They're not as advanced in automotive. Uh, but then on the other side, you've got Elon saying, there's
No,
going to be
yeah,
Tesla and the next 10 is going to be the 9 auto Chinese companies next to it. And he agrees. He goes, that might be the case.
absolutely
Yeah.
100% what Elon's sharing, and he's not sharing the whole picture. He knows just how
Yeah.
competitive the Chinese are. And I can say from my personal experience living in Asia from 1990 through just a few years ago, the transformation in quality and design of Chinese cars is mind blowing.
Yeah.
Mind blowing. I recently had the opportunity to test drive some of the latest Chinese cars. I was with dealers from the United States who now sell some of the best products on the market here, and they couldn't believe their eyes. They said this is way beyond our expectations. So it's natural for us to think Chinese cheap car, low cost labor, but that was the past. Today, they're coming up very fast, and watch it, watch them.
Okay. I want to get to electric vehicles. Who's going to end up winning that game? But I'm curious what you think. How's Tesla doing in China? We know that Tesla Model Y is still the number one selling vehicle in China, despite selling in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. But Tesla's going to come out with their compact car. They're going to come out with a very affordable car. It's going to be really, really good. I was telling people that you're worried about BYD getting into Tesla's, range, but actually, why aren't you talking about Tesla getting into BYD's range when they've got a compelling low cost car? What do you predict what will happen in China for Tesla?
Yeah, Tesla enjoys enormous popularity, as does Elon in China. That hasn't changed. Enormous respect, recognition, acknowledgement. They are number one in the EV industry globally, no question about it. The Chinese are still trying to close that gap. So, from a market perspective, Tesla is still in very good shape in China. As you know, half of Tesla's production globally last year was centered in China. So, they have that low cost manufacturing. They have a customer base there that loves the brand. The only threat in my mind is, guess what? Are we in World War III already and don't know it? There's
Mm-hmm.
enormous invisible political tensions in
Mm-hmm.
play. Most recently, representatives from Congress are saying, put Starlink in Taiwan. Oh my goodness, if he does that, what will the Chinese say? That's real. That's a real stressor. And China being China, they can turn the taps off pretty quickly if they want to. Look no further than, for example, the book you mentioned earlier about General Motors in China that I wrote several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
GM was once the poster child for the success of the US China relationship. GM sold more cars in China than in the United States, made massive profits there. Today, no. Sales are down by more than half. Profits have dropped like a stone. GM's looking like, ooh, we might be hitting the exit soon. Mary Barra last week said, we're going to have to move up to Cadillacs because everything else we're not competitive in. Basically, that's what she said. So the tide can turn very abruptly in China. Elon
Mm-hmm.
knows that. I think he's riding his wave as long as possible. And at the same time, building up manufacturing in Berlin, Texas, Mexico, sort of to diversify his portfolio in the event things go sideways in China. But today, they love them, and they love their Teslas in China.
Yeah, some people are pointing out that when he was asked the question of, what's happening with the compact car, he answered by, first it's going to be Giga Texas. This is where the line is. Then Giga Mexico. Then another. He didn't say China. It's the most logical would have him saying Giga Shanghai, right? Most logical. He didn't name it. So people are nitpicking on the words, and they're going, maybe he's just, doesn't know if that's where he should be,
That's a great read, or he may not know. He may say, that's my first choice, but things are dicey right now. And I don't want to go on record saying it'll be in Shanghai because I
Okay.
just, yeah,
How successful would the Tesla compact car be in China?
phenomenal. You have to be price competitive. You see the Chinese driving down the prices, BYD starting at 11,200 now. Um, that would play very well. I don't think we're talking speculating. I would like to see, this may be counterintuitive, but I'd like to see Tesla go higher with a bigger model in China. China, surprisingly, is the largest luxury car market in the world. It's twice the
Right.
size of the US market.
Yeah.
Twice the size. Few people know that. They don't have any problem spending 80, 90, $100,000 on the Mercedes and BMWs and Audis. I would love to see like a new version of the S or the X, and I think they'd do extremely well in China. If he goes down to the $25,000 car in China, it's crowded and brutal. When the Chinese, they're like, that's their comfort zone. You want to compete on price? Yeah, thank you. Let's do that. So I'd like to see Elon go up if possible rather than down in
Yeah,
the
that's
China
a
market.
very interesting point. Yeah. I don't know if these stats are true or not, but I seem to remember like China's population is 5 times the US. And people forget that.
Yeah,
And
they
there's as many millionaires in China than there are the population of the US. like like what? You just don't
what
realize it.
it's incomprehensible. The other one I love to play with a little bit. If you imagine China and the United States are about the same size in terms of landmass, and as you said, China has 5 times the population. On top of that, most of Chinese people live the equivalent of east of the Mississippi. So you've
Mhm.
got a massive concentration of people on the East Coast in China. And then the
Mhm.
West is largely desert, mountains, and inhabitable areas. So
Mhm.
you go to China, when I'm in Shanghai, arrive at the
Yeah, they're
airport, I
all there.
see thousands of people there waiting for,
Yeah.
their flights. And then you fly to Beijing, whoa, thousands of people there. It's unlike anything we
Yeah.
could imagine here in the United States. People everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to electric vehicles in general. So, what do you see the future? So, we talked about it's going to be Tesla and 9 other Chinese, but is there going to be a consolidation? Will all the brands go away, and Chinese will continue to buy up the brands like they have with Geely buying Volvo?
Yeah. So future electrics, Tesla, I see Tesla, I see BYD, and then something that is also not that well known is there's a lot of other Chinese players, but they're not on the same level. So many of those, several have already gone bankrupt. Many
Hmm.
others will too. It's a tough game. You need to have a incredible personality and a genius like Elon to sustain an EV company for as long as he did. Remember, as recently heard, it's like 2018, 19, it was on the ropes.
Yeah.
Are we going to
Mhm.
make it, right? Manufacturing intense. So that's same kind of gravitational reality is that pressures on every EV startup. So if we talk about 5 years from now, I could see Tesla,
Mhm.
BYD, probably a major Chinese state enterprise because they never go away. They're state backed. Maybe a Shanghai Auto with
Mhm.
the MG brand, and maybe a Geely. Even Geely has a tough time making money. And Volvo, and you saw recently Polestar, Volvo divested from Polestar, saying, "Hey, that's our younger brother. We can't carry our younger brother anymore." Threw it back up to Geely. Geely, will you take care of? And then they just announced this week Geely's going to give $1 billion, in my mind, lifeline to Polestar. Terrific car. Love Thomas Ingenlath. Love the design. But hey, you still have to make money, and it's brutal out there. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question. But I see Tesla,
Yeah.
BYD, and maybe a player to be named later, really dominating the EV market.
What about the legacies? Who's doing well? Who's not? When I interviewed like Sandy Monroe, and they think that Hyundai, Kia is doing very well.
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier that I think BMW will survive just because they've also made a full commitment to go EV altogether. What's your thinking? Who's the legacy that will make it through?
Gosh, I think the Germans will luxury will find a way primarily by leveraging their exclusivity. They have very loyal customers, and they'll be forgiving, I think, in the way that maybe some Tesla customers are forgiving too. Yeah, I love my Mercedes or my BMW or my Audi. They'll be around, even if they aren't at the top of their game with EVs for another few years. So I'd say they'll be around. That's one camp. Hyundai, Kia, you mentioned, very impressive to think that a country with a size smaller than the state of Michigan, where I'm from,
Mhm.
is doing so extraordinarily well in so many markets around the world and doing very well in electrics too. So they're a winner in my book. Um, Tesla, of course, is at the top, but you're asking about legacy. After that, I get genuinely concerned. Like we're talking in recent weeks that the Europeans and the Americans are saying, let's get together and share costs
Yeah.
because we don't
Yeah.
know if we'll be able to make it alone. And I think all bets are off after that. And I don't know. It's really an uncertain time, and they could easily go by the wayside.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've lived in China, you said, since 1990 till now, just recently. So BYD, tell me their story. They're a battery maker. What is their competitive advantage? How do you see, how do they make money? Right now, there's $1,500 profit, but they just talked about being in all segments. They talked about that we're a technology company, not we're moving away from this image that we're, a low cost provider.
Yes.
Tell me more about BYD.
It just as you say, this past couple of months they introduced this brand new their flagship brand called Yangwang with an SUV that starts at $160,000 and a sports car, hyper sports car starting at like $230,000. So they're going for it, top shelf. Now that's so interesting because BYD's origins are as manufacturers of batteries for cell phones for the first 10 years. Then they moved into cars in the mid 2000s. And when they moved into cars, they didn't have batteries ready to power those cars. So they actually licensed gasoline engines from Mitsubishi and had cars running around BYD label, but they were gas powered. Then their big break came in 2008 when, of course, Warren Buffett invested in them, not because of the cars. This isn't that well known, but because of
Mm.
their energy storage systems business. He said, and then he himself, Warren Buffett, didn't make the final decision. He said, I don't understand energy storage systems or their car business, but I'm betting on this guy, Wang Chuanfu. And he was right. Wang Chuanfu eventually, BYD in the 2010s began to make pretty decent, decent EVs, but not widely popular in China, mostly for taxis or state enterprises. The turning point in my mind was around 2016 when they hired a guy named Wolfgang Egger, a designer from Audi, who really began to design for them some beautiful vehicles, ones that you wouldn't look at and say, "Oh, that's a Chinese car." You'd say, "Oh, I'm not sure. Is that Korean? Is that European?" So they've vastly improved the design. At the same time, they're now leveraging the fact that they were a battery company for so long, really gives them a massive advantage. They're totally vertically integrated. They make their own batteries. They process a lot of the minerals that go into the cells. In some cases, they own parts of the mines. So total vertical integration helps them drive down their costs. And now they're extending themselves into the manufacture first of low cost vehicles. And then more recently, we're talking the last year into this Yangwang flagship brand. So it's impressive to see. What I'm reminded of, Herbert, is imagine Intel inside at its
Mhm.
peak saying, we're going to now make a smartphone like the iPhone. That's
Mhm.
kind of comparable to this BYD story. Manufacture batteries, manufacturing batteries for cars, and then eventually wrapping a car around that manufacturing of batteries and that whole supply chain. That's what makes this company really powerful. They've got the costs, and now they got the car designs that make them really good looking.
Is there some truth to some people saying that BYD is very they're not efficient because they haven't fully embraced autonomy, robotics, the industrial robots. That there are 650,000 employees.
Mm.
Is that true? That's they haven't not yet. They're not an autonomous kind of a factory.
That used to be true, but no longer. They
Mhm.
have they've got robotics. It's clean. It's quiet. It's modern. It's impressive. And at the same time, it's also true that they have 600,000 employees, including 90,000 engineers, and they're registering patents every single day. So they're a formidable company. And I think the big what would it be? Head fake or
Mhm.
misconception or risk of a misread for us in America is we
Mhm.
look left and right, we step out on the street, we drive our cars, and we go,
Yeah.
this must be hype. This
Yeah. I
must
don't
be
see
hype. If
BYD.
you're any good, right,
I
Herbert,
see them here. Yep.
they'd be here.
Yeah.
Obviously. I mean, Toyota came, everybody comes
Hmm.
to the market in the world, that's the United States. Where are they?
Hmm.
Well, what we have to keep in mind is there's this other place called China that has a market 25 million units last year, I think, against our 50. So 10 million units bigger than we are.
Yeah.
Produced 30 million. That's 20 million than we produced. There's a new king of the hill. If an alien came down to Earth today and said, take me to your automotive leader, where would they go? They would go to Asia for sure.
Yeah,
And
that's crazy. Eh?
it's
Yeah.
hard for us to register that.
Well, it was non-existent just like a decade ago, and now
Not
they're like,
existent. That's
uh,
right. When I first tell a quick story, when I first went to Asia in 1990, got right out of school, got on an airplane, flew to China, had an idea. I'm going to set up a company to
mhm.
advise automakers coming into the China market to sell cars. Well, I got there. First thing I noticed, there's no cars on the road. They're all bicycles. And I signed up at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Beijing, and an older British gentleman said, what are you here for? And I said, I want to set up this company. He said, you've got to be kidding me. Hello, there's no income here. Every car, if there is car, it belongs to the state. There's no private ownership. So those early days were, were hard knocks, but eventually, you know,
Yeah.
it exploded. We know the rest of the story.
Do you know much about autonomy and the car self-driving? We
Mhm.
see a lot of demos from these Chinese car companies that they're able to do this as well. And then
Yes.
specifically BYD, what's their approach in all this?
When I think of autonomy in China, I tend to think of Baidu
Yeah.
first, and then maybe
Yep.
Pony. Um,
Right.
and the automakers sort of secondary. The automakers
Right.
are relying more on chips from and software from NVIDIA or Qualcomm. So you got sort of two camps. But when it comes to autonomy, Baidu has a joint venture with Geely. It has its own vehicle called the Baidu Apollo. So that's the company I watch most closely is Baidu. And then Pony would be second. There's also interesting company called Momenta that's invested in by Toyota and GM. So, what's the difference, Herbert? In China, the local officials have a strong incentive to see companies succeed because it
Mm,
means
yeah.
more employment, more tax revenues, more money. In the United States, the local officials, especially recently with Cruise and Waymo, have a strong incentive to avoid any problems.
Yeah.
So, our technology in the United States is as good, probably better, but China's path to market and commercialization is quicker. So, advantage China, I think 5 years from now, they'll be able to develop more quickly just because the environment is more conducive to that in China than it is in the U.S.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know. I've been
yeah,
following closely autonomy. Of course, I still believe Tesla's got the drives, the miles, the technology. And then when you saw what happened to Cruise, you start wondering whether or not, and you find out what happened to Cruise, right? It was all
yes.
faked out. It was all faked out. There was actually teleoperators, people, humans watching the videos and taking over when they needed to, as opposed to it being truly autonomous. And I wonder if some of the Chinese demos are the same or not. But you're right. Don't count
That's
them
true.
out.
China can
Yeah.
be a black box. We don't know. Living in
Yeah.
China as long as I did, there's a saying among China veterans like two things. One, every day in China you see something you don't see every day. And two, and two, if
I love it.
anyone says they know for sure, don't believe them. Don't believe them. Nobody knows. Even the Chinese don't know what's going on. It's such a black box
Gotcha.
there. Cruz, you mentioned you may know that I also host my podcast called Driving with Dunne. And this just
Right.
past week we were talking about Cruz. There's some serious hurdles to clear. One, technology. Two,
Hmm.
um, how do you win the trust back for Cruz or
Yeah.
Waymo now that you've had it? How do you
Yeah.
win the trust? That's a big one from government
Yeah.
officials and public. And third, and this is one that's less talked about, is the money. How do you
Mm.
make money? And so in recent months, we've seen Chinese leaders in AV technology start looking around saying, we don't actually have a really strong business model, or we can't see that path. So maybe we can start to sell some of our capabilities or license it to others. And that
Mhm.
to me was a sign like, oh, there's a little bit of a panic in the industry. How do we turn this into money? Um, Whereas, as you said, Tesla, Elon's
It's
been
built in.
very consistent. We're
Mhm.
going to get there. We're going to get there, and we're getting there, and it's going to happen. And usually, when he's that insistent, it turns out that way. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Amazing. I wanted to ask you because of your knowledge of China, the coming humanoid bot industry. So China is the manufacturing hub of the world for decades, and they do that because of their low cost labor. They must be freaking out because if humanoid bots is a thing,
yeah,
they are the first to all of a sudden, nobody needs to create their factories in China only. I know that the Chinese government, I did a big show on this about 3 months ago, did a huge announcement saying that we are committed to become the leader in humanoid by 2027. And
yes,
as we said earlier, if China government says something, they put the money, they
oh,
will invest in it, they'll make it happen. And I would believe them because we're talking about, manufacturing hub no longer becoming manufacturing hub. They need to be the humanoid leader. Um, do you have any understanding of like what do you think the government would do when they see a threat like this?
what we have seen in the last 5 years in the industry is that a little bit counterintuitive. We've seen massive investments in robotics in the automotive plants for sure.
Right.
So you go into China and that's happening. And by extension, I believe, don't quote me on this because it's not my area of expertise, but I believe China is the number one buyer of robots today.
Mm-hmm.
So um, China put together that Made in China 2025 blueprint back in 2014, where they said we want to enjoy supremacy, not be competitive. Supremacy in chips, AI, EVs, autonomous technologies, and robotics.
Mm-hmm.
So on chips, they've fallen way short.
Mm-hmm.
On EVs, they've just gone way beyond.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how they go with humanoids. I don't know, but as you said, they have massive. The Chinese mindset is very much, it's our time to shine. Xi Jinping, the leader, said, we're moving to the center, US to the side, Europe to the
Yeah.
side. It's our time to
Yeah.
shine. So
Our time.
they're feeling quite confident and they have the resources. So,
Yeah, but
as, yeah,
they're going through massive deflation. They're struggling at this point. In fact, it's the opposite. If anything, right
right.
now they're. So, what do you think is going to happen? How do you play this out?
Oh, it's a great point because they, in a way, they wanted their cake and eat it too. So we're the center of the world, we manufacture, we're leaders, and we'll export globally, and everyone will be dependent on us. But they're finding that maybe it's a two-way street. And so today, I sense that there's enormous pressure on Xi Jinping. There's no obvious successor to him. So bets are that he will continue to be in power until such time that the economy deteriorates to a point that people say enough. And there's some kind of unexpected event that I can't predict. But that's
Mm-hmm.
sort of the history of Chinese leadership. He's holding on, he's not thinking about going anywhere. And he's insistent that the party leads in all categories and the private sector is there simply to serve the party. And it hasn't been going well for him the last few years, but he doesn't have any opponents. Where's my competition?
Interesting.
That's my
Let's go back.
that's
Yeah.
my way of avoiding it. I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
the answer to the question, so
Nobody knows the answer to the question, of course. Yeah, I understand. So tell me, let's go back to Tesla, right? So there's this belief that Tesla is far ahead of everybody else. And then there's somebody who said last week that, there's a chance that the Chinese would overlap Tesla. What's your thinking is what is Tesla's strengths and what is it that they could still like? I cannot see any other company, no matter what, not even the Chinese. There's no way that they're going, in my mind, for everything I know about how Tesla runs.
Yes.
But I won't underestimate the Chinese. I'm not going to do that. But I just know too much about Tesla's advantages. But
Right.
what's your perspective? Yeah.
I think Tesla's secret superpower would be imagination, and that leads to innovation, and
Yeah.
that leads to new features, new breakthroughs that seems that is very difficult to keep up with. So, in contrast, the Chinese tend to use brute force of massive scale, drive down costs, precision when it comes to quality and all the rest. But where is the innovation? Where is the imagination? Some people will say, "Hey, that's unfair," and they might be right because the Chinese do a good job. The tech sectors infusing their cars with all kinds of features and infotainment and karaoke and all the rest. But these, in my mind, are more playful things, not serious game changing innovation. So I think Tesla's in a class by itself. And if I believe privately, if you ask the top 10 Chinese automakers, they'd all nod in respect. Yeah, they have deep respect for Tesla, that they're not there yet. Like to be there, but I think
Yeah.
Tesla's in good shape for years to come.
So you're an auto industry expert, but there's been at least one tectonic change, which is the EV revolution that's happening. Clearly, EV is the future. You agree with that? Um, what about autonomy? So, what is the world going to look like
Mm,
if cars are able to self-drive? Version 12 is looking very promising, and it's self-learning. It's neural net AI. We all kind of understanding that AI can do amazing things. What happens? How do you see auto? Do you think car makers will stop selling this? There's
mm,
people are telling me that no, I'm a driver. I always want to buy my own car,
mhm.
and automakers will always sell this. But when I think about the business model for automakers, why would you sell it if you can make 5 times as much on a continuous yearly basis? How do you see it playing out with autonomy and robotaxi?
Feel like it's going to be in pockets, Herbert, not
Mm-hmm.
not nationwide. So we'll have
Yeah,
these like special zones
yeah,
where it gets
yeah,
traction and it really works, and it's like they say, the future's already here. It's unevenly distributed. That's what I anticipate. Then you'll have large swaths of nations and North America where that's a strange, bizarre way to get around. Maybe one day, but that looks like Martians to us. So
mm-hmm.
I feel
Mm-hmm.
as though it will be incremental, not sort of instantaneous overnight sensation. But it's coming, and it's thrilling, and it will happen, but in islands, on islands like that.
Yeah. Do you think that cities will actually embrace it, or do you think that, as many think, that they're going to put up so much regulations and they're going to slow it down and they don't want it to happen versus the opposite, which is
Mhm.
there's going to be a race to see I'm going to be the first city, the first
Yeah.
state that allows robotaxi.
Up until now, California was the sweetheart of the autonomous vehicle technology companies. And then ironically, or
Yeah.
counterintuitively, it's also been the toughest, it turned into the toughest regulatory environment. So look for companies to sort of decamp to Texas or Florida, or who knows, Ohio, just places that are more, or Arizona, places that are more welcoming to risk and innovation. Yeah, and I think that, so we'll see it again being geographic specific rather than sort of a trend that
Yeah.
takes over the nation.
Okay.
And then you
So
talk to people
yeah.
on the street. I travel all the time. I was in, last on the East Coast last week, and meet people, and they're like, "I would never get into a car where I'm not driving." So you forget. Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of people and different lifestyles out there.
Yeah, people say that, and then
Yeah.
they don't have the imagination, like you said, and all of a sudden it
Hmm.
changes. It automatically changes. I mean, this is an amazing world that's in, just like you said, 2018 to now, the world has changed so quickly in the automotive, the players, the technology, what's about to come is just crazy. So you you shared a little bit more, opened up my eyes in terms of how powerful and how, the Chinese industry shared some big numbers there. Yeah, BYD, I think you said they're the new sheriff in town.
Yes. They are the new sheriff in town. They have pricing or cost basis that impossible to meet, just
Yeah.
impossible. So if I am a Tesla investor, and I am,
Mhm.
but if I'm thinking about, today our conversation as a Tesla investor, what keeps me up at night?
Mm.
I think the number one thing is political tensions with China.
Yep.
So imagine it's our business, so we own it outright. Half of our production's in China, a large and lucrative markets in China. Supply chains, a lot of our supply chains are in China. That could go away with a stroke of the pen. Um, nope, you're done. Oh my
Sure.
goodness, that would be a huge setback.
It
Doesn't mean the end.
could, yeah.
Yeah,
But also, just to be clear,
yeah,
Tesla China is 99% in China.
yes,
With 95% of all suppliers are Chinese suppliers. So if they did that, they're harming themselves.
yes, they
And
are.
then
They are.
I've seen interviews with Chinese governments, and they speak not only, like you said, tremendous respect, but they believe that Tesla's presence in China kickstarted the electric vehicle revolution there, and that the EV companies there are all benefiting from Tesla to be there, as opposed to that they're competing against each other. They find that they are learning, like the suppliers, of course, and all that. So,
Herbert, I
um,
couldn't have said it better. You're
yeah,
exactly right. They love that Tesla's there. I call it the Tesla effect from 2020. If you map demand for EVs in China, it went
yeah,
from EVs are compliance cars that no Chinese consumer really wanted to, oh my God, they're the greatest thing that I've ever seen. I want one too. That lines up exactly with when Tesla went in there. And so the benefits to China have been enormous. If we look at the arc of Western tech companies in China over the
right,
last 40 years, there's like
yeah,
this thing, and we're kind of like 0 to
sure,
10,
and
and
then
10 means you're done. So we're
yeah,
probably at 4 or 5 now. We're peaking. And the
yeah.
next couple of years, we'll be able to tell us, are we going to stay at 5, or we're going to start to become less relevant or useful to China as China learns to do it themselves?
Interesting. Okay, well, thank you so much, Michael. That was great. Your knowledge is really unmatched here. Appreciate you. People can check out his website at doneinsights.com. You truly are an auto industry expert, and you're a global auto industry expert. That's really important. You can follow Michael on X at Dunne_insights. Just fantastic. So thank you so much for your time. That was good. Appreciate
Thank you
you.
for having me. Really enjoyed it.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.